Hello everyone, welcome to Business Talk podcast. I'm your host Deepak, and today we dive into the exciting world of brands and neuroscience. Our guest of the podcast is Professor Arvind Sahay, the Director of Management Development Institute, Gurgaon. Professor Sahay is a professor of marketing and international business and the chairperson at Brandscape's MDI Center for Behavior Science and Neurolab at MDI. Let's give a warm welcome to Professor Arvind Sahay, an esteemed faculty member specializing in marketing and international business strategy, joining us on today's podcast. Professor Sahay, a very warm welcome to this podcast episode, and it's an honor to have you with us today.
Thank you, Deepak. Very happy to be here.
Thank you, sir. Professor Sahay, can you give us a brief overview of your recent book, Brands and the Brain, and what inspired you to write it?
So, Deepak, you will be aware that my training is in the applications of behavioral psychology to problems in marketing, primarily pricing, branding, marketing strategy. So, over the years, as I looked at the applications of behavioral psychology, at some point, I started thinking about the fact that behavioral psychology is all between the 2 ears of a person, and between the 2 ears, we have 100 billion neurons. Which constitute the brain. And beginning around the mid 90s, late 90s, there has been an explosion in research on neuroscience, which tries to understand how the brain works. And I stumbled onto this research maybe around 14, 15 years ago and started reading it. And I realized that the research in neuroscience has a lot to contribute to our understanding of how not only the mind works, but what are the implications for decisions that people make. Decisions in the marketing context, decisions in the product design context, decisions in the human resource retention context, decisions in the context of branding, decisions in the context of advertising, and so on. And so around 12, 13 years ago, based on the initial reading that I had done, I started a course on neuroscience and consumer behavior, which at the time that it started was probably the first of its kind, maybe in the world, definitely in this part of the world. And after 2 or 3 iterations at Ahmedabad, when I was teaching there, kind of stabilized. And then one started to think about, okay, how can we do a little bit more in terms of the applications of the neuroscience that we were talking about in the context of branding, pricing, in the context of marketing more generally. And then once took the program to the course to industry. So around 2017, we started looking at having sessions for industry. And somewhere along the line, one started to do research and one established a lab at the NSE Center for Behavioral Science at Ahmedabad with a generous contribution from NSE at that time. And we had some equipment like the EEG and the eye tracker. The EEG is a cap with electrodes that measures your brain waves as you're thinking and making decisions, and the eye tracker tracks where your attention is. So the combination kind of gives you insights into what's happening in your head as you make decisions. And because of the advances in neuroscience, one can actually make some interesting predictions. So for example, if you have the EEG cap on your head and there's an electrode over here, it's called the frontal pole. And when the frontal pole is giving you N200 waves, then your brain is actually wanting to approach the stimuli. If you're watching an advertisement and you really like it and are attracted towards it, the frontal pole will give N200 waves. Similarly, if it wants to avoid it or dislikes the stimuli in front, then it will give you P100 wave. So in a sense, based on which electrode is where, the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the occipital lobe, and you can have 32 electrodes or 64 electrodes or 128 electrodes, you can very narrowly, in a very small part of the brain, you can look at the waves and map the waves to particular understanding of how the brain is reacting to a stimuli that's in front. So doing all of this made me think, what, there is nothing out there that actually puts together the understanding of neuroscience in an application-oriented fashion, which brings the concepts of how the brain works and then applies it in a branding context. So somewhere in, I think, 2015, 16, I thought of the idea of writing a book which put together the reading, the research. So the first piece of research we started around 2012, 13, 14. We started doing some research. I collected some data from the National Brain Research Center's 3 Tesla fMRI machine and so on. So the idea was therefore to put together all the learning that one had accumulated over the years through the reading, through the research, through other people's research, through interaction with students, through interaction with managers, in the form of a book that was able to communicate to the interested audience that, hey, you know what, this is how the brain works, this is how it makes decisions. And when it makes decisions in the context of brands, this is what happens in your brain as a decision is being made in relation to a branding choice. And, for example, if you really like a brand, then your nucleus accumbens kind of anticipates a game and it becomes really active, much above the normal mean mode of operation. Similarly, if you are choosing a particular brand and you think that it might be a risky choice, your anterior insula becomes active. And the chances are very high that you may not end up buying that brand because your brain perceives that choice as a risky choice. So all of these things we put together in the book. The book essentially talks about how the brain functions. So one is able to conceptualize the working of the brain in 5 brain operating principles, and how these principles, along with the way that the memory works, and along with the fact that some parts of the brain work consciously and unconsciously, and some parts work on reason and emotion. So RECU, RECU. So RECU plus memory plus the 5 brain operating principles gives us a framework for understanding how people make decisions in general, but for our book, in the context of making decisions about the brands that people choose. And therefore, what are some action implications for companies that are trying to build brands? So once we establish that this is how the brain works and this is how people make decisions about the brain, about the brands, then one looks at, okay, therefore, what are some action implications? How do you construct a brand over a period of time by leveraging the understanding of the brain's working principles? Then we look at also how to do it in a digital form, on an online form, because these days so much activity happens online. And finally, we go on to look at how does one operationalize this in the context of an organization? Because if you want to bring in these neuro principles into an organization, then it needs to fit into existing processes in a way that adds value to the company and to the company's clients and customers. So what are some internal organizational processes that are required to be looked at in order to add this new dimension to the organization's capability to evaluate, build, and roll out brands and to construct brands over time? And we kind of close out the book by looking at the tools, the equipment, which are required to be able to utilize the capabilities, the understanding, and to develop specific interventions or customer insights. So tools such as EEG or eye tracker or galvanic skin response or fMRI or PET, how do these work? Which one should you choose at what point in time and why? So that, in a sense, is the journey of the book. And for me, the idea was to be able to communicate and share all of this with a wider audience so that people could benefit, students and managers could benefit from the effort that had gone on. In many ways, I think my inspiration was the book by Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow, a Nobel Prize winner in economics, one of the leading psychologists of the 20th and 21st centuries. And his book very nicely summarizes almost 40 years of research about how people behave. And that was, in a sense, the inspiration in terms of the style, how I wanted to write the book in order to appeal to a much more wider audience, because neuroscience is a fairly technical field, and once one starts talking about the technicalities, then one may not be able to reach and communicate with the larger audience, which is the intention over here, to so that more people are able to benefit from the understanding, from the research, from the insights that already are available. It's a matter of finding the right experts and utilizing their capabilities to enhance the output of one's own firm. So that, in a sense, is the story behind the book and how it has happened.
Mhm. So, what are some of the surprising insights, about consumer behavior that you discovered through your research? If you can highlight.
So there are so many of them that I know it's a little hard to know where to begin, but let's see, let me try. So the fundamental idea that a lot of people go by is, you ask some people how they make decisions, and they will tell you that my decisions are all very reasonable or logical or rational, right? But the reality is that anywhere between 20 and 70% of any decision, sometimes close to 80 or 90% of any decision, is totally unconscious and maybe even based on emotions. Um, and I can show this to you through the activity in the head. And some of it is quite, you know, counterintuitive or totally unbelievable. So I think many people would have seen this movie Ghazni, where you have Amir Khan playing the role of Sanjay Singhania, who is unable to form fresh new memories because somebody banged his head, and the certain part of the head, which is the hippocampus, which is involved in forming fresh new conscious memories, that's damaged, so you can't form fresh new memories. But if somebody is Sanjay Singhania and I went to meet Sanjay Singhania, and when I met him, I poked him in the hand when I shook his hand, and then talked to him, and then I went away and came back after 3 hours. Now, because Sanjay Singhania cannot form fresh memories, so he won't remember that I had met him. But if I want to shake hands with him again, he will feel reluctant to shake my hand. Now, why is he feeling reluctant? If you ask him why, he has no clue, because he has no conscious memory of having shaken the hand and gotten poked in the hand. But his unconscious brain remembers it. And so a lot of the stuff that happens in our head is driven by our unconscious memories and emotions. So once one realized the extent of it, it was kind of fascinating to then see uh, different advertising messages, different brand elements from that perspective. Okay, here is what is actually happening, which is influencing the customer in a particular way, right? So if you look at the advertisement from Surf a long time ago, they ran a campaign, Daag Achhe Hain, where there is this boy and girl, small boy and small girl. Maybe the girl is around 4 or 5 years old, the boy is 6 or 7 years old, brother and sister. They're coming back from school, and the girl falls in a puddle, and her clothes get dirty, and little girl starts to cry, because she's upset. So the brother, slightly older brother, kind of wants to help out and to make her stop crying. So after thinking for 2 or 3 seconds, he starts to beat up the puddle. And in the process, he also gets quite dirty. But then after beating up the puddle, he tells the sister, "इसने देखो मैंने इसको इतना मारा, ये इसने sorry बोला." And the little 5-year-old girl, gets happy, and then they kind of walk back to their homes, and their mother kind of sees them, and instead of getting angry, she smiles, and then there is a voiceover which says, अगर दाग लगने से कुछ अच्छा होता है तो दाग अच्छे हैं. Now, that's the communication in the visual that Surf aired. But what is the intention behind the whole process, right? The idea is to sell Surf, and the target audience for this messaging is the mother. Now, mothers and fathers, one of the fundamental things that they would like to instill in their children is that siblings should watch out, should take care of one another, and they should look out for one another. So, in a sense, that entire visual is about the brother taking care of the sister by beating up the puddle because she got upset when she fell in the puddle. And that is the unconscious emotional appeal to the mother. एंड ओ बाय द वे, अगर इतने दाग लग जाते हैं तो सर्फ जो है आपके कपड़ों की सफाई कर देगा, राइट? So the entire appeal is based on the fact that parents unconsciously will look for the validation of this fundamental value that siblings need to take care of one another, and so the appeal is built around that unconscious emotion, and it is one of the most powerful campaigns that has been run, and one can quote for many other examples. So this was one key idea that kind of blew my mind away, that so much of it is happening unconsciously, and a lot of brands recognize this, and they are able to then build visuals, brand elements which are able to connect with the unconscious emotions and values of customers. The second very interesting point for me, which blew me away the first time I came across it, is that a lot of our memories are not real. Now, what do I mean by that? So, let's say you asked me about a trip that I made to, let's say the Brahmatal trek. I go trekking once in a while. So I'd been to on the Brahmatal trek a few years ago. And if you asked me to describe the trek, I might describe the trek to you that on day one, we were at this place. Uh, we started off from Dojang and then we trekked for so long. And at this point in time, we put up the tents and so on. So I might give you a full description. Now, if by some chance you also had a video of that entire trek, somebody was doing a video and you checked my description against the video, you will realize that only 60% of what I said actually happened. 40%, it was just imagination. It wasn't there. So where did that 40% of the long-term memory come from? So it turns out that when we recall from conscious memory, especially long-term memory, then the brain actually fills in around 40% from the immediate context, the mood, who you are with. If you are with friends, you will recall something else. If you are with somebody else, you will recall something else. And in that sense, long-term memories are only partly a high fidelity recollection or a reproduction, but a reasonably large proportion of it is a function of the immediate environment that one might be in. And again, from a marketing perspective, from a branding perspective, that is fascinating, because therefore what we are saying is that it is now possible for me to actually plant memories. It is possible for me to plant memories, because anyway, if I'm recalling something from my long-term memory, part of it is not real. So I could, as a seller, I can literally plant memories. So that was the second key dimension which I found fascinating. A third thing which kind of really made me uh, excited, and it made me kind of work harder on the book to get it out, was the fact that now there are these different tools, EEG, fMRI, which allow me to actually look deep inside the head and to understand that this part of the head, activity in this part of the head, a particular part of the head, implies a certain thought going on in the head. And if I simultaneously observe behavior, I can actually explain behavior, right? And so therefore I can design stimuli which are more likely to get the desired behavior, because now I know that a particular kind of stimuli leads to a particular kind of action in the head. And therefore, if I provide similar stimuli, I will get similar action in the head and therefore similar behavior. So to me, those are the three most powerful things that probably one can think about in terms of the book and its application, and what I would like to be able to apply in a much more wider context.
Professor Sahay, can you explain about emotional branding in terms of, like few companies are giving a message by using, emotional branding to viewers. So is there any correlation between neuroscience, emotional branding, and the reality?
100%. I mean, after all, what are emotions, right? Suppose I am feeling happy, or you are feeling happy. Why are you feeling happy? Because you might have a dopamine spike in your head, or you might have a oxytocin or a vasopressin spike in your head. These are all neurotransmitters. So ultimately, what are emotions? They are a cocktail of different neurotransmitters in your head. Now, the brand which is able to trigger the right mix of neurotransmitters in your head is the brand that you are more likely to buy. The surf example that I gave you, daag achhe hain, is triggering a particular unconscious emotion connected to values that I want to instill in my children. And so therefore it is unconscious emotional branding. There is another very interesting example from in the Indian context, which is about Cadbury's, kuch meetha ho jaye. Now, if you look at that campaign, there are many different implementations of it. One is a boy meets girl at a bus stop. Another one is a young married couple. Third one is a married couple with a kid and a mother-in-law. And fourth one is where people are sitting at a dinner table. There is a couple with a kid and grandparents, right? So many different contexts. Now, where is the emotional branding dimension? So if you look at the boy meets girl at the bus stop, where the boy approaches the girl and says, the girl is eating a chocolate. So he kind of says, can you give me a piece of the chocolate? And the girl looks at him and says, why? I don't know you. Why should I give you a piece of top chocolate? So the boy says, my mom says that before doing something auspicious, कुछ शुभ काम करने के पहले कुछ मीठा खाया जाता है. So the girl kind of grimaces and gives him a piece of the chocolate. Then she gets curious and she asks, अच्छा कौन सा शुभ काम करने जा रहे हो? तो the boy kind of says to her, मैं सोच रहा था कि आपको घर छोड़ाऊं. I was thinking I would leave you home. That's the shubh kaam that I'm going to do. Now, at one level, it's just a nice pickup line. Boy meets girl at a bus stop. But at another level, it's an unconscious memory that you are tapping into, because in Indian culture, many of us would have grown up with this kuch meetha on auspicious occasions, except that the meetha on the auspicious occasion usually meant some traditional Indian sweet. It could be a Rosagulla, it could be a Kanpuri Laddu, it could be a Barfi, it could be a Mysore Pak, whatever. So now what is the company doing? What is Cadbury's trying to do? It is inserting the brand into the ritual, unconscious ritual, habit, emotions that we are talking about. So it is associating emotions, unconscious memories with the brand. Brands like BMW, brands like Lux, all of these kind of engage in what is known as emotional branding. And ultimately, it connects directly to the neurotransmitters in your head. Literally, when you are in the presence of a liked brand, there is a part of your head called the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, which becomes more active. And there is another part of your head called the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, where activity levels decrease. The more active part is the part of your head that processes emotions, the VMPFC, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. It is becoming more active in the presence of a like brand. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the DLPFC, is becoming less active in the presence of a like brand. Guess what? VMPFC is the part which processes emotions. DLPFC is the part which processes reasoning and logic. So literally in the presence of a like brand, physiologically, your brain is going into a higher active mode so far as emotions are concerned. And your brain is becoming a little less active so far as your reasoning capability, your logical capability is concerned. Right? So there is a direct link between branding and emotions. And most of the powerful brands, the long-lived brands, have figured out a way to engage with the emotions of the target customer. And the target customer, you could argue, has reached a stage where they almost have a relationship with the brand, right? Now, you might think, how the hell does one have a relationship with an inanimate object? There might be a school of thought which says that relationships are between humans or between a human and a pet. But where's the relationship between a human and a brand which is inanimate? So there is a very interesting paper back in 2006 by somebody called Caroline Yoon, where she shows that uh, brands are processed in the part of the head, like brands, which processes emotions related to objects and not so much humans, but it is nevertheless emotions. So different brands have used emotions to be able to engage with customers. And arguably, the most powerful brands, the most long lived ones, are the ones that have engaged very deeply with the emotions of their customers, so that the customer is now literally emotionally attached to the brand, and in the absence of the brand might actually feel uncomfortable and may uh, experience pain, literally physiologically, because the brand is not present. So emotional branding definitely is out there. A lot of brands use it. You could even argue that marketing nirvana happens when a brand becomes the unconscious emotional automatic choice for its set of customers. And once you are there, then it becomes really, really hard for any competitor to dislodge you from there. And maybe that's the place that all brands should be aiming for.
Professor, let me give you an example. My friend is working with Indigo Airlines and he's taking care of client relationship analytics department. So his role is basically, to view the comments given by the customers, frequent flyer customers on social media, and based on that comments, he analyze the emotions and feelings, the experience what customer had, when he flight, in the airline. So recently एक बहुत वेरी पॉपुलर पर्सन इन इंडिया, उसने एक कमेंट किया था इंडिगो के ट्विटर पे, आई एम नॉट हैप्पी द वे यू आर ट्रीटिंग वेरी फ्रीक्वेंट फ्लाइट कस्टमर. So I really want to make this comment on a social media so that people can have a look about your customer service. सो इंडिगो के पूरे स्टाफ ने, मार्केटिंग का जो स्टाफ है उसने पूरा वो कमेंट को ट्रैक किया, वो कस्टमर का अकाउंट चेक किया, उसने कब फ्लाई किया था, नेक्स्ट टाइम जब भी वो फ्लाई करेंगे तो उसका पूरा एक ट्रैक रिकॉर्ड उसने जनरेट किया. एंड देन वो जब नेक्स्ट फ्लाइट में आफ्टर 1 वीक वो आए, तो इमीडिएटली उसको एक स्पेशल मेमेंटो के साथ उसका एक स्पेशल पर्सनलाइज मैसेज एयर होस्टेस ने लिख के दिया था, राइटिंग मैसेज. एंड उसमें एक गिफ्ट था छोटा सा, और उसमें लिटरली लिखा था, फ्रॉम द सीईओ ऑफ इंडिगो, वी आर रिग्रेट फॉर योर लास्ट फ्लाइट एक्सपीरियंस. So it's like the flight experience is also nowadays have a emotional branding.
True, very true, very true. In fact, where experiences are concerned, our emotions get engaged a lot more quickly, whether positively or negatively, because experiences are directly going to hit the brain rather than through a product, right? I'm experiencing the person in front of me talking to me, whether at the check-in counter or whether at the steward in the plane, when I ask for a glass of water or a cup of coffee, and how they talk to me and so on. If I'm feeling a little bit cold and I ask for the AC to be turned down a little, whether that person kind of responds to me and does something about it. So all of these are experienced very directly, and physiologically, they will affect my emotions, because when that person smiles at me, or when the check-in counter person does a good job, then I feel good because I get a spike of dopamine, serotonin. In this case, serotonin. I will give you another example of this, which happened to me uh, just a few days ago when I was flying. So, as a relatively frequent flyer, I travel with a carry-on and a laptop bag. Now, sometimes it happens that some official from an airline will tell you, sir, you cannot carry both the carry-on suitcase and the laptop bag because the weight is more. Now, if the carry-on suitcase is around 7 kilos, which is the allowed one, then a laptop bag of 3 or 4 kilos should not matter. But if the officious person who is checking kind of insists, you have to check this in, that's a real pain, and that is a negative experience, and that negative experience will cause a huge drop of certain neurotransmitters like dopamine, like oxytocin in my head, and that will make me feel bad about this airline, and it will cause me to have negative impressions, and maybe one will write on the social media, which is what you're describing. Now, the interesting thing is, because my neurotransmitter levels have gone down quite a bit, a gesture which exceeds my expectations will bring it right back up. And so, to the extent that I design something that if earlier I was here, then I came down here, but that gesture now puts me up there. So I'll become an even more loyal customer. And therefore, to me, the question is that in these cases of so-called service failures, what is the optimum design of the intervention that maximizes the positive spike of the neurotransmitter in the head at a reasonable cost to me as the airline? Um, so, in a sense, the design of interventions ultimately is about influencing the neurotransmitter mix in the head.
It's a very important to add, in neuroscience technique. Can you please elaborate about how artificial intelligence will help neuroscience to, in a branding methodology or in a process?
So if you look at artificial intelligence, there are two parts to it. The first part is what you call the foundational models, which is, or at least the LLM-based artificial intelligence that you're talking about, large language-based models, and now also the visual and auditory parts. There are foundational models. ChatGPT 4.0 is a foundational model. And then you have the application models, which are built on top of the foundational models. The application models might be in particular contexts. So if you are a call center, then you have taken a foundational model. And then on top of the foundational model, you have given all the data about your calls across customers for the last 3 years, all the conversations and the different documents associated with the conversation. So you have trained that AI with an application model now to be able to take on board and actually respond to new customers without human intervention up to a certain point. Now, if you look at neuroscience in the context of these customer service representatives who are at the call centers, you're trying to resolve a problem. So the AI application, in a sense, is taking the place of a human in helping you to resolve the problem. Now, there are several dimensions that one can think about over here. A, the person who is calling would naturally be happy to be talking to someone at the other end. And let us assume for the moment that the customer does not realize that he's talking or she is talking to an AI agent. They think that they are talking to a genuine person because AI is now advanced enough to simulate, because the foundational model plus the particular model can simulate human interaction fairly well in that narrow context. So the person does not realize that they're talking to an AI, and the problem gets resolved. Right? The AI is so good that around 95, 98% of the time, the problem gets resolved by the AI. Now, when a problem gets resolved, I get a nice spike of pleasure hormones in my head. So in that sense, the AI has actually helped my brain to get the nice cocktail mix. Scenario two is that the problem does not get resolved, and the AI then tells the customer, I'm sorry, I'm unable to solve the problem. Let me hand you over to a customer service representative now. Right? So far, the customer doesn't know that the person that he had been talking to an AI. Suddenly, the customer realizes, oh my God, I've been talking to a machine. Now, for many people, just that realization at that point will lead to a lot of discomfort. There will be a drop in serotonin, oxytocin, and so on. And when the customer service then representative then actually comes on board and starts talking to the individual, their first word should probably be uh, something to reassure the person. It's okay that you were talking to the AI, it's just a chat bot and whatever. But I'm here now to help you, and so on. So to make the person feel better about having interacted with the machine, because a lot of people would feel uncomfortable interacting with the machine. So this is one dimension of the AI versus the neuro, where AI as an application has some neuro impact on a customer in this case. The other way to think about AI and neuroscience is to think about how these actually are very closely linked to one another in terms of operations. So if you look at a lot of AI models, they use neural networks, right? Neural networks as the underlying premise to build the models. The AI model is built on underlying so-called neural network mechanisms, because the brain works in a particular way. It is a neural network, right? 100 billion neurons, which each with 10,000 connections to other neurons, so 10 trillion connections and so on. That's a neural network. The earlier models of AI were very simple, where the number of connections between the different nodes, the so-called neurons, the computer-based neurons, was very small. So in terms of parameters, maybe 3-parameter neural network model, 5-parameter neural network model, 12-parameter neural network model. Today's LLM models are, billions and trillions of parameter neural network models. So in that sense, AI and neuroscience are very closely linked. A lot of AI uses the principles of how neurons work to build itself. Of course, it uses math, fairly complicated high-level math, to figure out in an LLM what should be the next word in that sequence. So there are two levels of understanding the interaction between AI and neuro. One is where an AI is interacting with a person and what happens in the head of the person and the neuro impact in the person's head. And I use the example of a call center operator, an AI simulating a call center operator and then handing over to a human. So that's about the reaction in the customer and what's happening in the head of the customer and the mix of neurotransmitters. The other is the working of AI itself, which is premised on underlying neuroscience principles. And a lot of AI that works on these neuroscience principles is now doing reasonably well. Does that mean that the AI has the same kind of intelligence that a human has, what is known as general intelligence? Not really. But in narrow areas, obviously the AI can beat any human hands down, right? There are so many different examples of it where the AI has been able to create and create new stuff or solve problems which were considered to be quite hard. So for example, protein scaffolding. Uh, Humans are made of proteins. All proteins essentially have 4 atoms: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. But if you have a protein which has the formula, C10H22O16N5, there might be many different proteins out of the same chemical formula, because proteins ultimately function premised on how the atoms are located in 3D space. It's called protein scaffolding, right? How those carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen molecules stand relative to one another in 3D space. So we know that earlier when scientists wanted to discover how the protein scaffolding was actually working, they would need to do many actual experiments, real life chemical experiments in the laboratory to figure out the scaffolding. But then you got an AI called DeepMind, and or was it AlphaGo, one of the two? No, it was DeepMind, I think. Then DeepMind was able to run its own unsupervised learning algorithms to be able to discover a couple of million ways in which proteins could build their scaffolding. So suddenly now you've been able to use artificial intelligence, which is built on underlying neural network mechanisms, to solve a narrow problem which scientists would not have been able to solve in another 5 or 10 years. It would have taken them. So in narrow areas, artificial intelligence can actually exceed human capabilities enormously. Artificial general intelligence, on the other hand, is a little more difficult for the reason that we still haven't discovered a way to get all the relevant data into one artificial intelligent entity. In a very small context, let's say I have trained an AI to drive a car. Now, the data that I used to train the AI to drive the car was all the relevant traffic data between New York and Boston. Cars going on the road, there is the zebra crossing, there are these lights, there are these free right turns or control right turns. This is the speed limit. This is what, there is a signage on the top, and this means that Boston is so far away, and so on. There is a speed limit over here, which is 35 on this highway. There's a speed limit over here, which is 75, and so I can increase the speed. So all of this data, this is the amount of traffic, all of this data is there. So this autonomous driver, AI-based driver, can quite easily drive the car from New York to Boston. But if I put that autonomous driver and the car in Chandni Chowk in Delhi, then there will be an accident in no time at all, because the poor fellow does not know how to deal with the traffic, because it does not have data that can simulate even closely the traffic over there. It's not 3 sigma, 4 sigma away from the norm on which it has been trained. It is like 105 sigma away. And it's the typical long tail problem that AI cannot solve at this point in time. So in that sense, we are, while AI has a lot to contribute, it will be interesting to see how unsupervised learning mechanisms are allowed to take on board data, or are given the data that allows them to proceed towards artificial general intelligence. I suspect that as we discover more about how the brain works, AI will become a very nice assistant to smart humans. And smart humans will become incredibly more smart by using good AI assistants. But even other humans, let's call them the general citizenry of a country, could also have some pretty nifty AI assistants that help them to navigate life in a much more efficient manner than is the case just now. And in that sense, the right use of AI can make us all happier, give us more dopamine and serotonin than what we have just now.
Thank you, Professor Sahay, for your very fruitful and thoughtful views. We would like to know more about Brandscape's MDI Center for Behavioral Science and Neurolab. If you can, because you are the chairperson of this center, so what are the activities you are going to conduct, or in a process, if you can just share with our audience.
So the purpose of the Brandscape's MDI Center for Behavioral Science and Neurolab is to be able to do research and consulting with relevant constituencies. So at this moment in time, for example, we've just finished a project for a billboard company where we assessed what is the impact on the head of watching a billboard on a highway in the morning versus evening, on the right versus left, which is more impactful in terms of the brain activity, so that this billboard company can then use that insight to be able to choose the right billboards and also to price to their customers. Another project that we are doing in the lab is to look at what is the impact on the head, inside the head, of similar visual advertisements across platforms, whether it's on TV or on OTT or streaming and so on. Is there a difference in the way that it impacts the head? Because if it impacts the head differentially, we talked about the emotional impact on the nucleus accumbens and the anterior insula. If it impacts it differentially, then that's useful information for the advertiser in terms of choosing the media. We finished a project some time ago for a utility company where we looked at the efficacy of different employee engagement pillars. These days, young people come and they go, and if the company has invested in their training, that's money down the drain. So I would like them to hang around for longer. So I take some employee engagement initiatives, but I want to figure out which one is likely to work better, because I can't spend money on 5 different initiatives. I would much rather spend on 2. So which are the top 2? So there we kind of put the cap on different employees and made a suggestion that this is the one. Growth in this case is more likely to be something that the employees will engage with, and that may make them stay longer rather than sustainability, which was another one of the employee engagement pillars. So those are some projects that we are doing or we have done for corporates. We're also doing projects where some PhD students are doing some research, either as part of their thesis or otherwise. So, for example, one particular piece of work has to do with the emotion of awe, how positive awe and negative awe leads to a differential evaluation of brands. Another one that we are doing is on the reaction to designs, a human-centered design versus an AI-centered design. So if you ask a human to design a particular, give them a prompt and say, please design a shoe which looks a certain way, and they come up with a design. And if you say the same thing to an AI engine and says, please design a shoe, and each one of them comes up with a design which is somewhat equivalent because the parameters are the same, then you show the designs to a human. Will a human like the human design better than the AI design, or the other way around? So that's another piece of work that we are doing just now. The idea of the lab is to increase the level of awareness of people and the skill sets of people in recognizing the power that neuro can bring to the table. Typically, if you're looking for customer insights, neuro can add anywhere between 20 and 40% increase in the accuracy of the insights that you generate. If you're looking at product design, you can increase the efficiency of the design quite a bit. So lots of different areas in which there are applications. We also are looking at being able to utilize the facilities to be able to educate some of our students. So there will be an elective that is being offered for students on neuroscience and consumer behavior, and PGDM students are allowed. In fact, the elective is meant for them. It's the same elective that I used to run earlier, which is also being offered here. So multiple different things. And the idea is to make it into a self-sustaining center that engages with companies and is funded through collaborative efforts on research and consulting with companies. And apart from this lab, we also established a Center for Artificial Intelligence and Applications in Business recently. Because in a very real sense, AI and neuroscience are, in my mind, almost 2 sides of the coin. And any business school that is able to leverage and enhance its capabilities built on these 2 underlying fundamental drivers of a lot of business activities and to train its students to be aware of and to be skillful users of these two dimensions would probably be able to have something unique that many of the other schools may not necessarily have at that level. So that's a little bit about the center and the lab. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about it.
Yeah. So coming to your book, Professor, what key takeaways would you like readers to have from your book, Brands in the Brain?
I think the key takeaway is essentially understand how the brain of your customers, of your team members, of your vendors, how they work, and then utilize that understanding to come to better outcomes. And the 5 principles are fairly straightforward, simple, almost intuitive in many ways. Applying it requires creating some habits. And maybe that's the topic of my next book. How do you create habits that allow you to leverage your understanding of how the brain works?
Excellent. Thank you so much, Professor, for spending your valuable time with us. And we would be in touch with you for your next book.
Thank you so much, Deepak, for the opportunity. Pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.